From Tidal Health Group, this is Health Impressions, where we break down healthcare marketing strategies for consumer brands with industry experts. I'm your host, Bryan Cush. Jessica, I'm so excited to have this conversation. We probably should hit record 15 minutes ago, but I'd love you to just give a quick intro of yourself and kind of who you serve in this space.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian. My name is Jessica Walker, and I'm the founder and CEO of CareSherpa. To explain CareSherpa really kind of starts with my history. Prior to healthcare, I was in the hospitality space, so think hotels and guest experiences. That led me to Gallup and Press Ganey to look at sciences around how patients act as consumers, and then leveraging that into healthcare. Why I founded CareSherpa and the problem that we solve is that last mile where the patient as a consumer and their ability to go from interest to appointment, having that Sherpa or guide that guides them through that last mile and frankly helps them with the conversion, with the sales and the pipeline management.
I love that. I mean, besides my own self-interest, that we are that preceding step that drives that inquiry. I think there's still such a massive education gap within healthcare, just understanding how much value is lost in that last mile if not done correctly. When you get approached with this topic, where do you start? Just starting to lay out the opportunity when it's just
Yeah.
people are so bottom funnel, appointment, get it, drive that metric, and we're done.
Yeah. Actually, I similar approach it from an education perspective. So before I meet with a partner, I love to do a mystery shop, and I will go through any of their digital front doors. I'll go through any call to action they have on their website, on social media, whatever the case may be, and we just test it to say, okay, if you're putting that signal out there and a consumer responds, how do you react? And that literally tells the story itself. So I'll give you a great stat. In our research, when I started CareSherpa, 79% of healthcare leads never convert. It's actually gotten worse. As we do these studies and these mystery shops, we continue to track it, and it's now 81%. So what happens today in healthcare is that we're treating this new patient journey as a transaction. We build it, of course they're going to come, right? So we turn on the phone lines, we turn on the ads, someone calls in, someone gets a referral, and we are not treating it as a sales process. It's more of they're going to come after, they want me. Not recognizing healthcare has shifted and is shifting where they don't necessarily want you. They're not sold on you yet. They're maybe exploring you, but if you don't seal the deal and help make it easy for them to do business with you, they're going to get in the car, they're going to get on a plane, they're going to go across the country, across the world to get the service because the consumer experience is different.
That's amazing. I mean, it's scary in the other regard too, that it's
Oh
getting
my
worse.
gosh.
So there's
Yeah.
clearly an opportunity to continue to fill that education gap. I mean, how do you start to then just educate that next step? Is okay, we've gone through the funnels or the channels of intake that you've offered, and how do you start to then show where those gaps exist and how to address them?
Yeah, it's really kind of twofold. So many times people just assume oh, we need to train our call handlers, right? We just need them to go, I call it smile school. We need them to learn how to answer the phone right. We need to learn, blah, blah, blah. No. If the fundamentals, and you and I, geeked out on some of the technology pieces, right? So there's subtleties into, you can generate a lead through Google Ads, let's say, or through your website organically because you've got great SEO, but how that consumer enters and then their unique buying persona or buying journey is completely different. And if your call handlers are not trained on those nuances, or even if they're not trained, the ability to track that. So for an example, somebody, again, not just demographics of your date of birth and what insurance you have, but, some of the factors of how they find you, what's most important to you. One of our favorite questions, and I'll tell your listeners, if they did nothing else, they can incorporate this into their discussions with their call handlers, but it's start the conversation with why now? What prompted you to reach out? What's, triggering you to kind of think about this service today? That will tell you so much about where this consumer is in their buying journey and what their needs are, and then being able to pivot it from there. But then again, back to the technology, you need to track that so you can learn at scale. If I have 200 leads in a month and 70% of them, are compelled because of, maybe an insurance change or because of a doctor referral gave them this, that's great intelligence. That's going to shift your marketing if you understand it.
Yeah, I love that. You said something too, whether you did it consciously or not, it was use the word consumer, which is what I
I'm very
love
conscious. I'm
of
very,
that.
yeah. And this goes back to hospitality, right? So I've been in people service my entire career. That's where my heart is. We call it a service heart for that. And I know healthcare is not comfortable with treating, but that is the day and age. I myself recently had a procedure, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I drove 3 hours away to Memphis because I selectively chose a provider. Great qualified providers here, but that provider hit other criteria, and I was willing to go out of my way. That's a consumer buying journey, right? Thinking about it collectively. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we're seeing this with all the service lines. Let's use fertility as an example. Patients are getting on the airplane and going to Turkey to get the same service they could get here. Why? But it's not always financial. People want to assume it's financial. It's not. There's so many other factors that play into it.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a lot of advocates, one you as well, that shift, just that shift in mindset of customer or consumer, because there's such a
Mhm.
finite understanding of the word patient that just kind of like starts and stops when you get in the room and when you leave the room. But to
Mhm.
me, I think that
Everything happens before they even get to the room. I talk about that before they cross your physical threshold, or even if you have virtual appointments, before they actually make that decision, there's so much that's happened up to that point. And if you don't embrace it, understand that, and then dive into it, you're missing great opportunities. I'll give you an example. When we get started with a new client partner, we talk about, hey, what's your lead volume every month? They'll give me, a number, let's say it's 150 for a given procedure. I automatically add another 35% on top of that because I know that there's so much that they're not tracking, that they're not paying attention to, that is just lost in the noise, right? And but then understanding of that, how many of them like never move forward, never book, and why? What are the barriers?
yeah, I want to double click too on. I'll throw in one of my own why now examples, and I'd love to hear yours too because it made me think of we had a interesting women's health client that we didn't explicitly say why now, but we kind of gave that unstructured box to just almost vent a little bit around like why are you reaching out to us.
Mm-hmm.
I think we had like 1,500 inquiries, and there was this really like we took all the unstructured data and we found two simple touch points essentially through all of them. That was I'm in extreme pelvic pain. This was kind of like the subspecialty for multi years, so already like that gives a lot of headspace. And I'm frustrated with the healthcare system because I've had multiple touch points with other specialties.
Yep.
So it like gives a really deep insight into just the patient base that's inquiring into this practice.
Yeah, we think about it in a lens, and again, my background, like I said, consumer. This is a consumer buying journey, but it's also highly emotional. People want to believe in healthcare that we're making it as a logical, kind of rational decision making. It is absolutely not. And so the other reason we start with the why now is because exactly that. We want to hear your emotional hooks. What are those things that are like triggering you? And to your example, just by slowing down the conversation instead of saying, what's your name, what's your date of birth, what's your insurance, if I'm just asking you, like, yeah, what prompted you kind of, and you tell me you've been in pelvic pain for years and you've had all these providers, ignore you and think you're crazy and, tell you to go to counseling instead of getting, care, like even having someone just pause and say, I'm sorry that's happened to you. I'm sorry you're experiencing that. And then say in the next breath, I'm so glad you called us because I believe, that we will help you with the next step in your journey. What that simple conversation kind of game changer was, is it built trust, it built confidence, and I feel seen and I feel heard, right, as a consumer. And this goes back to the old adage, right? People remember how you made them feel, and that's a foundation. Before I can even get them to your clinic and have them come in for a consultation and talk about all of your clinical expertise, I have to make that first impression that makes it very clear that I can be trusted and that there's hope. If you meet with my provider, I'm not telling you that we're going to solve your medical issue, right? But there's hope, and that we have the ability, and then we can talk about your credentials. We can talk about your, why your clinic or your group is so great to serve them. But you got to start there with the treat them as a human, as a person.
I'd love to you've dropped this nugget a couple of times before too around uh, uh, how common it is that people just reach out once
Oh
after
yeah.
an inquiry.
Hmm. Yep.
Maybe double click into that too, because that group's a perfect example. Is that this patient base is telling you, I'm frustrated with healthcare.
Hmm.
I've already dealt with it a ton.
Yep.
And then they'll get these inquiries, and then what do you do with them?
Yeah, I love that. So again, consumer buying journey hat, right? Let's put that on. So the first thing is the average healthcare, again, in our mystery shop studies. So as I mentioned about the 81% that never convert, well, a big part of that is if we get a response back from a web inquiry or from another kind of new patient inquiry, typical average is 72 hours before someone gets back to us. And I'm sorry, think about your day to day. Like my life has just moved on. Like I was in the moment thinking about this issue and I'm finally ready to take action. And you wait 72 hours to call me back and have that conversation. Like now I'm thinking about my kid's soccer game. I'm thinking about the, plans I have for the weekend. Like I don't have time to think about it right now. So you missed your window for me to buy, right? But then the other side of it, to example, is that current healthcare today, that's what happens. It's one phone call and we get into voicemail hell. We start leaving voicemails and blah, blah. And then we maybe call the person once. The best I've ever seen in my mystery shops is 3 times that they've tried to reach someone back, right? But that's not modern day. I'm sorry, how many phone calls have you answered in the middle of the day that comes completely unplanned, right? Now, if you text me, if you offer me live interaction, like that's way more consumer friendly. And when I'm in that moment and I can get it resolved. But yes, I mean, that's why our methodology, what we have discovered depending upon service lines, it takes 6 to 9 contact attempts to try to connect with so we'll work a lead all the way through. And I've yet to meet any other healthcare practice that really follows it to that level. Like I said, it's one voicemail. Your front desk says, "Oh, we tried to call them. They're not interested. They haven't called us back."
Yeah, what I love about that too, because we see the other lens is we track 12 to 15 digital touch points before they're even willing to make that physical outreach. And
Hmm.
that's not like they're fully loaded and they fully understand. They're just going, okay, now I'm interested. You still have to continue to convince me.
Yes. Yes, they're not bought and sold on you. And I think that's a fallacy that a lot of providers think about of like, and again, they've done wonderful education, they're published, they're talked about, right? They've got great results. And it's that whole like fallacy of, oh, I'm going to build it, they're going to come. They're just going to show up because I'm amazing, right? Or I'm here. And our studies have shown, and you see the trends in healthcare, like I said, they will drive across the state, they'll drive across the country. So you cannot rest on that. And even and there's some great stats around the number of referrals. So depending on the service line, something like around 37% of referrals never activate, like as in never get back to you. So you cannot rely that your partner, your OBGYN that made that great referral, it doesn't matter because you still have to convince them, to think about this service, think about the treatment, and let alone think about working with you.
You have another great nugget I've heard you talk about too of this, like, once the patient just initially confirmed in the practice, like what to send them right away. Can you dig
Yeah.
into that a little?
Yeah, so again, thinking about it from a consumer buying journey, right? That's the color of the whole thing. So we've done a great job. We've warmed you. We've got you excited. We call it a cheerleader call to come to your appointment, right? But then there's other little nuggets along the way. So how do you differentiate your brand from another provider? Because depending upon the service line, they may be shopping multiple providers before they decide to move forward, right? And so differentiation, like, are you thinking about them as a person? So we will send people guides on, hey, here's what to think about as you start to prepare for this procedure, or here's a proactive recovery guide, or hey, here's a caregiver guide to help you talk with your, spouse or caregiver about what to expect with you going through this procedure. And in some service lines, like fertility as an example, we bring the caregiver or the partner into the conversation too, because we know that they will be an influence maker around whether or not you move forward, right? So then even when they come in and have the consult, we will follow up with we still call them a lead at that point because they haven't decided to commit to your procedure, right? We'll follow up within 2 hours after their first visit just to see how did it go? And that's going to be very predictive of whether or not you move forward, right? Or if there was an opportunity it didn't go well, we can do service recovery. So those are just little subtle touch points. So when we map out the full journey for a patient on their decision from first interest to first appointment to procedure table, we have multiple touch points throughout the way just to keep you warm, to keep the positive brand experience continuing, and frankly, just to provide great customer service. So that way you feel seen, heard, and like someone cares about you.
What I love about that and just like can validate again in the digital experience is the same thing. We'll have a what to expect page on the website, and you can
Mm-hmm.
literally see this journey where they're coming in and they'll hit learn about a condition, then they'll click and want to read the reviews, then they're going to want to learn about the providers, then they're going to learn about the approach and the treatment, and then they go to that what to expect page. And then they inquire, but it's not like they learned your entire approach in that experience. It's that, like you said, that
Yep.
reinforcement and continually
Yep.
showing them the experience.
And I also like it too, again, if you we talk about active listening, right? Like when I'm talking to a patient as a consumer for that first impression, you're dialed in. And you may ask me a question of like, oh, does the doctor do so and so? And just validating your question, like, Bryan, that's a great question. You know what? He had a wonderful video on YouTube. I'm going to send it to you now. So after the call, you can see it. Again, subtle little thing that I'm listening to you and then I'm reinforcing like, oh, you're going to love Dr. Jones and here's a great video to show like he addresses this exact question. Um, for some providers, those are kind of like private videos that we can send out just to, share. We know someone's on their journey, right? Or a lot of times though, it's just stuff that's already out there, then just like cross-selling the patient to reinforce their decision making.
Speaking of the private videos, you have this funny bat phone tip that I'd love for you to drop as well, which I absolutely loved.
Well, I say in what context of like for the patient or for like the team itself. So
Yeah, the patient. Like once you kind of confirm that you're now a new patient of the practice.
yeah, and so we talk about some of these things, like some of the, again, how do you make it easy for your patients to do business with you, right? So by having a dedicated line that they can, again, part of that buying decision and having that, and we call it the bat phone because it's like the bat signal, right? Goes up, and we also work with practices to make sure that if we have a hot lead that we need to move forward, that we don't put them into voicemail hell. We don't put them into the IVR, right? Or get them directly to the nurse when there is a question that's appropriate. Because if you look at studies around why people get frustrated with the state of healthcare, that's it. They are the lower priority. So signals like a bat phone tell to that patient, you are a priority. Now, again, I'm not saying that every patient gets this, kind of like VIP concierge level support, but at certain stages in the journey, you sure as hell better make sure that they can, continue to move forward because that will delay their likelihood to have the procedure. And it's crazy. Like as an example, it's little things such as like we know 48 hours before a procedure, like they're starting to think about like, even though you've given them pre-planning documentation or post-discharge documentation, just having somebody remind them that it's there and resend it to them makes all the difference in clinical outcomes too.
I'd love to shift gears a little bit because I think we're underrepresenting and probably only, I don't know, maybe half your value. It's like I feel like we've just talked to like what the industry will often look at as kind of like the one-time value.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you then like, okay, we're plugging all these gaps in, we'll just call it a
Yeah.
7 day period. It's kind of like, okay, just like make sure you can handle these inquiries. You're treating them like customers. You're getting them on the books and you're getting that initial touch point. Even that, I think a lot of people go, okay, we've solved the problem. Great.
Uh,
But to
yeah.
me, it's like there's a whole other side of you and value that you have that I think we haven't even touched on.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that, Bryan. So when and again, regardless, I'm not a sales pitch for CareSherpa, right? When I think about this, though, in terms of, I talk to providers around like you have to think about it as a pipeline, right? And what are the gates and stages and phases that could cause leakage? And I say leakage is in revenue leakage, where somebody is come in, you've done a great job getting them there, they come into the funnel, right? But then something happens and then they just don't move forward. So a big part of our value is understanding those key gates, measuring the typical timeline. So to use an example, if somebody comes in for a consult and they commit to move forward and you need them to get labs done within a certain period of time before they can get approved for the procedure. We track how long is it taking for someone to get to that and is it done? And if not, then it throws up flags to say, hey, Bryan, is something happening? Can I help you with transportation? Did you have difficulty getting those labs? Again, proactive support based on, triggered, because otherwise, like we lose that opportunity to move that person forward, right? So there's that part of like understanding the journey and the timeline. But it's also the data and analytics around, again, where did they come from? How are they progressing through the journey? And feeding that back to our operational partners to say, hey, we're seeing a lot of friction at this stage. Like I use the example patient paperwork. Nothing gets me grinded more than patient paperwork. So we had a practice who was adamant about giving patients homework. We're like, okay, that's fine. We'll help you manage that homework. But what human behavior? I don't have time. It's not top of mind. My kids, soccer game, whatever, right? And I missed the paperwork window. So what was happening is that they were 24 hours before the appointment. If the patient didn't have their homework done, they're canceling appointments. Like, sorry, you got to rebook now, right? Exactly. Not consumer friendly. How about we call them and say, hey, Jessica, it looks like your paperwork's not done. Can you come in, half hour before and get that done? Right? It's really important. And part of it was that they assumed that the doctors wanted to have a pre-chart review before the appointment, but that wasn't happening, right? So the important stat was, though, when we found that of those that they canceled the appointment, less than 10% rebooked. And of that less than 10% that did
Hmm.
rebook, there was single digits that actually moved forward. Now, my perspective is like you done pissed them off and you didn't treat them well, and so did they then reconsider? So the data shows that once you apply those friction points, you're going to lose people, and so let's make sure that those are really valid and that we need to have them for the true opportunity.
That example stirs up these like DMV pain points. It's
Yes,
like
yes,
it's which is like the
yes.
polar opposite of what you want
Mhm.
someone in
Yeah.
pain to be experiencing.
Well, and we really specialize on high margin elective medical, right? So you're talking about a $20,000 procedure or even hell a $5,000 procedure, right? And everyone counts. And when you put any friction, again, thinking about it from a consumer mindset, even to the point where I've worked with a practice that to say, look, let's just factor this into your scheduling capacity that we know a certain percentage of patients are not going to have their paperwork done ahead of time so that we have buffers, right? That if we get behind because we had to wait for the person, like, let's do that. That's still the right consumer answer than trying to force people into what is our process and putting, people over process. So,
Yeah, there's this like funny throughput lens that I hear from you as well. Of this just like I don't know if it's breaking down silos, breaking down departments. Is there a lot of this like bringing people even on the client side just
mhm.
together? I feel like that seems like
Yeah.
a thread.
I'd say that it's more from a place of, and again, it's not malicious, it's not because somebody feels a certain way. They just have never had the data to recognize the impact of some of these decisions that we make, right? So another great example, we had a partner who we realized we were losing a high level of people that for these labs, right? There was a delay in getting the labs. So pulling the data, we showed that there was a business case to have an on-site phlebotomist to pull the labs while the person was there, because then the business case showed that by having that and being able to bill and get the timing together, right? But again, without the data to show that, they just put it on this kind of like this is the process. So I say that from the silo breaking, it's the same thing. Like we put a policy in or we have a way of handling a patient and we feel like that's the right thing to do for the business, but we don't think is it the right thing to do for the patient as a consumer.
Yeah, that is. I mean, it's so funny that the secondary and kind of tertiary effects of just continuing to lead with the consumer. You're going to catch all this kind of like operational flack and
Yep.
blockage that ultimately is just going to then have a net benefit back to the business.
And where you get really good at it too, and again, from a CareSherpa perspective, we start to also, because what I'm going to hear kind of in the back of some of your listeners saying like, oh, but there's some pain in the butt patients that, if we start bending over backwards, it's going to, blah, blah. And I'm not disagreeing with you. Like people in dealing with the consumer and the public, like there's lots of personalities, right? And so where you get really good, and especially when you tune your funnel and your pipeline, there are certain ways that you can also decide early if this consumer is a good fit for our practice or not. And so we get to the point where, again, if your pipeline is full and you have the luxury of having all your capacity filled, then we start having the conversation around like who's our ideal patient and how do we identify them and how do we, if they're not our ideal, how do we direct them to the right place that can serve their needs because if it's not us.
Yeah, I think this is what I always love about reconnecting with you is you have that equal balance of kind of like qualitative and quantitative, where we get that all the time of just like this freak out moment, like, oh, someone couldn't submit the form on the site, like everything's broken. And it's like, is this an N of one or is this something that we've seen? And then it's usually you dig in and it's really like, it was just a user inexperience problem, not something, a bigger issue to really address.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where I'd say that the power of, and again, you think about it from a collective, it is the data and the intelligence, and like you said, any other industry you go into beyond healthcare, the nuance of understanding the pipeline and understanding like the buying journey and having data points around it to show, as gates and KPIs, it makes the business decisions easier, right? So for us, like that's the way that the lens we put on is like, okay, well, what does the data show us? Do we have enough to show that there is a business case of adding, X and Y and Z or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, in full circle, it makes the business more profitable. I mean, I know you said like this
1,000%.
isn't a CareSherpa demo call, it's not a Title Health demo call, but the thing that sits with me, and someone funny even said this to me recently, it was just a very kind of affluent, well-regarded doctor, just said innovation is expensive.
Hmm.
That's everywhere. That's not
Yeah,
just healthcare. But like we're willing to accept that, and certain it's like obvious when you think of like new consumer technologies and
yeah.
hardware. But he's like, as if I want to push the boundaries of care delivery, initially that can be expensive. And then I want to democratize it and bring it to healthcare at large.
Yep.
But partners like yourself and companies that understand that kind of full lifetime customer journey are just only going to then feed back to that innovative mission.
Well, and I think about the conversation you and I had before the recording started too, around how do you, I also believe, depending upon the service line and the practice, like it is absolutely okay to get very niche and really understand what do you do best when it comes to this treatment, this procedure, or the type of, kind of dynamic with the patient. And then once you have the data to support that, you can shift the business, you can shift your marketing. So a lot of times when we onboard with a new partner, we talk about what's the most profitable services you offer. And then I'll ask the surgeon or the doctor, which ones do you like to do, right? And because then, like when their eyes light up about X and Y and Z and say, okay, is it profitable? If it is, great. How do we get you to do more of those? And then over time, it's like we're cleaning the pipeline, we're cleaning the messaging, we're cleaning the brand to really focus on that. And then that's where you kind of get that snowball effect, right? Of revenue following passion, following, what makes best for the business. So, an example, I have a provider who they had a large flow of volume from payers for a certain service, but when we broke down the numbers, we're like, you're losing money on every one of those procedures. Yeah, the volume number looks good, but because your capacity gets filled with them, I don't have room to bring in the cash pay, patients that are more profitable. And so we had just had to look at it from a business decision to say, what's the right way to, we might immediately lose volume by cutting off that pipeline, but now we've opened ourselves up to grow. And, they'll tell you with the 360% growth they experienced that it was worth it for that short term, because we see the long
Mm.
term.
Yeah, I think that was probably a good example, but I'd be curious, you've clearly consciously used the word partner a lot with identifying your clients. Is there common pain points that are the ones that kind of resonate and trigger that would then engage you as the right partner?
Yeah, great question. So for us, like usually talk about even like with buying journeys with patients, what's the compelling event, right? What happened that has them thinking like there's got to be a better answer? So for us, usually CareSherpa is brought in because they've had a lot of turnover with their call handlers, or they experience that, they recognize that maybe they're not handling that new patient journey appropriately. Right. And so they're recognition they're losing volume. The second typically is competitive threats. There's some new competitor that's come into the market and offering, lots of marketing and lots of SEO, so they're losing market share. And then a third is like they're looking to expand and scale, and they recognize that the processes and the things that they're doing are not setting them up for scale, right? So those are usually examples. But it starts with, honestly, a lot of times it's their marketing partner calls me to say, hey, we've sent them 200 leads this month and they only closed 20. Like, something's going on because we know our marketing is good. And that's usually where a good conversation starts. And for an example, for any of your listeners, we're happy to do a consumer mystery shop for you. As I mentioned earlier, it's one of our favorite things where we just kind of tell you, we report out, this is what happened. I present as a, high margin consumer who's qualified clinically, and how'd your team do?
I love that because we always talk about this concept of just like who's the most important person in your practice, and it's usually the doctor's thinking that, and we're like, it's the person that picks up the phone call the first time.
1,000% first impressions are the last impressions. And I think that that's a, for your listeners, that that's nothing else. And like if they haven't done it themselves, like, I'd mystery shop them for free, but like literally call your practice yourself. The number of providers that have never like tested their current experience, like that's the, and again, going back to the bat phone example, you're going to spend all this money on marketing and then no one's going to answer the phone, or you're going to put me on a 10-minute hold before someone answers. Yeah, that's just, you're flushing money down the toilet then.
Yeah, I wonder if you bumped across this too. We had this in a really recent scenario where there was like all this money spent on technology integrations to surface real time, like bi-directional appointments and all this stuff. And we're like, okay, we'll just like take a look at this big fanfare you released. And like a big chunk was they also had an urgent care. And we are like, so we go down to the channel of urgent care and this deep technology integration. The first available appointment for urgent care is 2 weeks out.
Hmm.
And we're like, did anyone like actually go through this? Like
Nope.
you may have done the integrations and
Nope.
did all this work, but did anyone actually test it like a consumer?
Yeah. My Hall of Fames are, so again, I purposely, like I said, I will go as a digital consumer and we find you wherever you're listed. My two Hall of Fames are that one recently where I called the number on their website on their banner, right? And when I called it, it brought me to a call center in India selling medical alert, because apparently no one renewed the contract on the 800 number and it got picked up by this medical alert and they had no idea how long, right?
Oh
So
man.
that was fun. The second one is that I went deep and I found, a listing for them in some kind of like, third party kind of listing site, right? And when I called that number, I got the JCO patient safety line. And so, like, these are things, again, that we're not thinking about, right? But if you're going to spend all this money on marketing and trying to get people to you, why would you drop the ball there at that last mile?
Those are some great funny nuggets to take us out on.
Yeah, the CEO didn't feel that it was very funny when I told him about the
Yeah.
website because, like, yeah, so who knows how long, right, to see that. So, but no, to your point, I mean, that's where we just view it differently. We view it as a consumer, and even the subtle things around, like, how easy are you making it for me to do business with you? And if you put these barriers in front of it, I might try a little bit, but most of the time they're just going to give up because if I don't have time, right, I'm going to go to the next provider that makes it easy.
Yeah, I think we both have this kind of mutual understanding of it's like take a look at the opportunity loss lens. Like there's so
Hmm.
many times where we look at like, oh, our panel's not full, we're not at full utilization, like dump more money in marketing. And even as the marketer, our first is to just go, well, let's make sure we're optimizing what we're already paying for. Like,
Yes.
why do we want to just keep shoving more money down a funnel that's leaky?
Yep. And that's our foundational belief. Like I will, when I get brought in from a partner, 1,000%, I say, I just had this with an addiction medicine group recently where they were like, oh, we're going to turn on this big campaign. And I was like, no, you are not ready. Because right now, I'll tell you, of the 500 leads you have a month, you're only getting 136 admissions. And that's because every time we call, I'm sitting on hold. I am not getting good answers. I'm not getting first impressions. Like there's money in what you already have before you go flush more down the toilet.
I call it focusing on the non-sexy, boring stuff. It's like
Yes, the
everybody wants the
basics.
flashy campaign,
Yep.
throw the money, but it's just
The
like,
silver bullet doesn't
yeah,
exist. Nope, nope, nope.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's it. It's like I'm all about innovation. Like now the hot new thing is like AI chatbots and, AI kind of agents, call handlers. And again, I'm not saying there's wrong. We're actually going to be releasing a study here soon about a recent a penetration testing we did for an AI-driven call handler experience. And just to kind of not bury the lead here, out of all the contact attempts, there was only 15% that actually made it through to the point of getting a consult booked from this AI agent. And
yeah.
they had no idea, right? And so, yeah, don't go chasing silver bullets and shiny balls and squirrel chasing until you know that you've got your basics down.
I feel like you'd agree with me. Simple can be innovative, and you see it in the response of just the patient satisfaction of them going
Yep,
like, "Wow, this little simple thing like really made me perceive you as a different level of care." I would
yep,
define that as innovative.
yep. Yeah, an example, like, how many times have your call handlers or your front desk gotten a positive review, right, on Google for the support they gave? I'm going to venture to bet the majority of them don't have that, right?
Yeah.
where, I mean, but that's it. Like you said, what's old is new. Just, I mean, differentiating yourself from the competition by having a real human who cares about you and is accessible, that's mind blowing, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
but
I,
I think like, I talked about this. I have another partner where we do training to help, like if you have an existing team and you want to help them level up their skills, right? And we go in and talk about, we believe foundationally, whoever answers your phone, if you treat them as $100,000 resource, because that's what they're worth to you, right? Depending upon the practice in terms of what they can generate with revenue, in viewing them that way and the importance of their job, are you going to let them not answer the phone because someone else is in front of them, right? Or let the phone call go to voicemail? No, you're going to treat it totally differently.
yeah.
And and I'll tell you, like my top performers, like that's the lens with which we look at that in terms of like we want them to get to $100,000 role because that's the amount of X they have in revenue generation on top of that pays for itself.
I'm surprised it took me this long to get here, but do you like give book recommendations at a point to your clients? I feel like there's just like a mental framework and a mental shift that has
Yes.
to come foundationally.
I'll send you a list of like the things that kind of have helped me get to like this point as well in terms of thinking about it from a consumer buying journey and like the healthcare. But honestly, it's one where just looking at it, you think about it, you correlate to a major buying decision you've had as a person, right? The last time you use it, buy a car, buy a house, whatever the case may be. Could you imagine like walking on a car lot with 100,000 in your pocket and then having them just ignore you, right? Like that's not going to happen. And so that's the piece that we just have to start thinking about of like every phone call, every lead, if you put a dollar amount to it. And then whether, I mean, because I'll tell you, my top practices convert 90% of their leads because we've gotten really good at targeting. We've gotten really good at closing those, right? But today, probably most of the practices listening on this call have no idea what percentage of their leads they truly convert.
That's a good hook to end us with. I'm always appreciative of your time and always great to reconnect. Is there a place online best for people to engage with you, Jessica, or CareSherpa?
Yeah, so CareSherpa.com, really easy. Like the Sherpa is your guide over the mountain of healthcare. And I'm really active on LinkedIn. If you look for Jessica Walker, you should be able to find me. And I know Bryan, you and I kind of connected as well. But yeah, as I again offer to your listeners, if anyone needs a kind of outside perspective or mystery shop, happy to do that. No cost, no obligation. It just gives you an insight, and I can compare your performance to our benchmarks, and I'd be happy to share that with any of your listeners.
Wonderful. I always love reconnecting with you, Jessica. I appreciate the time.
All right, sir. Good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Health Impressions. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. Leave a review to help us improve and connect with us on social media. Keep exploring, learning, and pushing boundaries. Tune in again soon.